My name is Willy Bolander. I study influence, persuasion, and leadership in selling and sales management, and I teach people how to sell. In this podcast, we'll talk to some of the world's top sales leaders and see what we can learn from them. Welcome to the Sales Lab. This episode is brought to you by Rainmakers. But here's the thing, it's not the word Rainmakers. It's the word Rainmakers with no vowels. RNMKRS, Rainmakers. How will artificial intelligence change the future of sales? Will it help us do more, replace us? Join Rainmakers virtual sales competition to see AI in action, helping thousands of students get massive role-play practice and feedback on a bias-free level playing field, and it's free. To join the movement, go to rainmakers.org. Again, that's RNMKRS, Rainmakers with no vowels.org. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the Sales Lab. Got an interesting interview with John Crossman today. This is the first in a series of 2 episodes that are pulled from my discussion with John Crossman. Pretty interesting guy, real estate mogul, entrepreneur, also does a lot of charity and fundraising and works with historically Black colleges and universities and athletic departments for various universities and institutions. So in this part of the conversation, we'll talk a little about investing your effort, mentoring, managing a portfolio of relationships, and negotiation. And I hope you get something out of it. By the way, I know some of you have noticed that episodes have not been published in any consistent timing over the last few weeks. That is in part because I caught COVID and was in bed for about 3 weeks. So I am completely recovered, but struggling to get caught back up at the same time. So hopefully I'll be able to get the remaining episodes of season 1 out there for you. Thanks again. I believe when we first met, John, I got one of these emails that the university sends out when we have, hotshot alumni coming back into town, and it said, hey, John Crossman's going to be in town, and if there's any classes that have to do with sales or real estate or anything like that, you would want a guest speaker in, he'd be happy to visit. And I thought, yeah, I'm always happy to have somebody come in and do my job for me. So I said, absolutely. And you came in, we met, you were very nice, you had very good things to say, but I didn't really understand. I knew you were an alumni. I knew you were deemed a successful alumni, but I didn't really recognize what your company at the time did. And then as I was driving home from campus that day, I started realizing that maybe not every single commercial shopping plaza that I drove by, but maybe every other one had a big Crossman sign in front of it. And I realized, oh my God, like this guy's company owns every public shopping center that I drive by, right? That I was just it's one of those things, kind of like when you buy a new car and you think, nobody else is really driving this car. And then once you are driving the car, you start seeing it everywhere,
Right.
And I couldn't get away from these Crossman signs. So that was kind of my introduction to you. It was kind of a nice meeting, and then realizing, oh my gosh, this guy's company's kind of huge. He doesn't just own a couple rental properties. This is a big deal.
Well, I appreciate that. It's funny, in my career, I've often had people sometimes think I'm smaller than I am. I've had people think that I'm bigger than I am. But at the end of the day, I'm really just trying to be helpful and serving to whoever I'm working with. It's a funny thing about brand. John Rivers and I have had this conversation that, sometimes people are responding to you and sometimes they're responding to the brand. And that happens in different contexts, as both good and bad.
Yeah. And John Rivers is the owner of Four Rivers Barbecue. They have locations throughout Florida.
Correct.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how you go from, scrappy undergraduate student at Florida State into, successful CEO of a rather large real estate company.
Well, so the beginning of that goes back to that, my dad was a pastor and civil rights leader. And one of the reasons why that's important is because I grew up in an educated household, and I grew up in a household that was visionary, like seeing bigger things. And then I grew up like my mom gets mad when I say that we grew up poor. I've sort of evolved it to say that my dad had a spirit of the Lord will provide, which is good, and I admire it. I remember one time as a kid that my parents went grocery shopping, and they came home, and then before they got to the grocery store, my dad somehow bumped into somebody, and he gave all our groceries away. So I grew up quickly becoming a devout capitalist, that I really admired what my dad did, but I really did not admire the lifestyle. And so I really wanted to be an occupation where I could make a lot of money. I did not know this until my 40s, but I'm actually dyslexic. And so while I've always really admired academia, it was really hard for me. And so as I got into, looking at careers, things like that, real estate on the sales side, and it's tangible. It's something you can look at. It's not abstract. All that kind of came together for me. And when I think about some sort of fence post moments in my career, a lot of it's really like being the first guy in the office, last guy to leave, really, really focusing on hard work and really working on investing into myself that kind of pushed me into the top 1%.
And so how early did you have to show up to be the first one there?
Listen, I was a 7:30 to 7 guy for many, many, many years. And back pre, iPhones, for a huge percentage of my career, I would work Saturdays as well. I'd be in the office from 9 to 1 on Saturdays. If you had a camera that was following me all the early years of my career, first 15, 20 years, and the camera was focused on me at my desk working, and you pull the camera back, you would see a sea of empty desk. So there were just lots and lots of moments. I was the only guy. And one of the big key moments for me was in 1993, I was 22 years old, and there was a big conference in Las Vegas, and they sent everybody, all the salespeople, but me. The next year, I'm 23, they sent everybody, including me. The next year, I'm 24 years old, they sent just me, and they left all the other salespeople at home. And so that was a huge moment. So you think, how in the world did that happen? Well, that first year I went, I was the first guy in the booth every morning, and I would not leave the booth until everyone else had left. Well, the second guy to show up every morning was the CEO. And so he said to a group of people, the next year there was a really tight budget, money was down and revenues were down. And so they were picking who to go. And the CEO said, send Crossman. That guy works hard. Now, the truth is, I didn't know what I was doing. I just was showing up, right? Yeah. And then probably about 4 years later, he sold that company to a global firm, and he had like 1,500 employees. But when he talked to the CEO of the new company, he said, the acquiring company, the guy you need to watch is Crossman. And so I became a senior vice president at 27 years old. And when I think back on that, a big component was, showing up early, having a great attitude, leaving late. And let me say this, I don't necessarily recommend this, to everyone, but I think that when you're an achiever, like your goal in life is to do some bigger things, there's just an hours game of like really putting in the time that is very, very important.
Yeah. Well, I talked to a lot of early career salespeople and, of course, our college students, and I always try to heckle them, if you can imagine, John, about their ideas about a work-life balance.
Right.
And I don't want them to drive themselves crazy. I don't want them to have serious mental health issues because they're just burning themselves out. But at the same time, and maybe it's just my lack of imagination or my bitterness, that my 20s were not a nice balanced lifestyle. But kind of think, well, what does a 22, 23, 25, 27-year-old need with a work-life balance? Probabilistically, you're not married. You don't have children yet. Maybe you're starting to have children as time progresses, but you don't really have a life. I don't like the idea that you might be able to have more time to go to bars or hang out at the beach than I would, right? Mm-hmm. When you're supposed to be working and building a career, and I always try to get them to think about it in kind of a longitudinal way. Your work-life balance is something that you start off way off balance. I mean, I guess kind of like investing in anything, right? I mean, you have an awful lot of investment that you put in on the front end that you don't get a return on. And then eventually it levels out and you have that, you can achieve that balance, but it's not something you can walk right out of the gate with and claim.
I agree with you. I would say it like this, that you've heard the expression that no one is lying on their deathbed and wishing they had spent more days at the office. And I think that's ridiculously not true. And the reason why I say that is that lots and lots of people die alone. And part of the reasons why they die alone is that the people, their family members have to work, and they are not in a situation they can take time off or take care of them. And so, now the other extreme is I know people who worked ridiculous hours into their 60s and 70s and even 80s. And I think that's can be like a work addiction kind of a thing. But you're totally right that, if you work really hard in your 20s to max out your 401k, there's a huge impact on that later on that enables you to relax more and have more time off. And the same is true as just for hours. The same is true as for education. All of that has impact. And the other thing too is like life only gets busier. Like you might talk to a 21-year-old and they say they're really busy, and the response might be, well, then get married, right? And you think you're busy and you're married, well, then have kids, right? So there's always this, big things coming in means some big things have to go out. And so investing your time into yourself so that you can have more opportunities, more resources, I just think that's a very wise thing to do. And I don't mean to say at the cost of exercise or healthy relationships and things like that. But honestly, my problem is I would get up at 6:30 and I would, might go for a run or exercise, have breakfast, and I'd still be the first guy in the office. To me, working 9 to 5 is pretty easy. And so, now I work more closely to those hours, but I can get I'm a lot more efficient nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. I had a similar approach when I started going to grad school to do my PhD. The year that I showed up, the year before, they had basically kicked everybody but one student out for kind of underperformance on their exam. And so I came in just scared, knowing that, oh man, they're looking for any opportunity to give me the axe. And so me and my cohort mate, my friend Bill Zahn, would ride in together. We'd get in first thing in the morning before the secretaries, before anybody else, before the administrators, I should say. We would make the first pot of coffee so that everybody coming in would know that we were already there. A little signaling. When you walk in, the whole place smells like coffee. That was me and Bill. And we just decided, if they give us the boot, it's going to be because we are just fully not smart enough to do this. It's not, nobody's going to be able to look at us and say, yeah, they didn't work hard enough. And I think there's value in that. Like you said, you didn't know exactly what you were doing when you were showing up first thing in the morning. Mm-hmm. But it's just it's like a show of good faith, right? Okay, right. I'm here. I'm taking this seriously. I'm not. It's not an afterthought to me. I'm here to be successful.
And listen, everything you just said is so on point. That for me, when somebody comes in the office and they're used to be the early person, and the lights are on, like there's messaging in that, right? And there's just nothing kind of beats a young person with a great attitude that's really working hard. And the other thing is that, trying to find stuff to do, asking people, how can I help? Right. And the other part of that is that if you're wanting to get mentored by people who are successful business people, you need to work around their schedule, like trying to get time with them at, 10 a.m. or 2 p.m. or something like that. There was a guy that did a lot of mentoring to me when I was at first in real estate, 93, 94. And he was a heavy drinker, and I think you noticed about Willy that I don't drink. But he would say, "Hey, if you want to talk about deals, meet me at this bar at 8:00." And I would show up at this bar, and I would drink a ton of iced tea, and he would get all kinds of fancy drinks, and I would just sit there and take notes. And I spent a lot of time in that bar, a lot of time eating pretzels. But it was when I could get time with him, and that worked. And it's funny, to this day, he and I are buddies. And, I've always really treated him with respect. He always treated me with respect. And people used to laugh because they would think he and I were the opposite personality-wise. Why did we get along so well? And the reason why we got along so well is we respected each other. I really treated him with respect as a professional, and he was respectful to me. And 30 years later, we still have a great relationship.
Yeah, that's great. So what were some of the things that he taught you?
He taught me, a lot of times just the basics of selling, not being too forceful trying to get a deal done. He taught me the skill of killing deals and recommending to kill deals. Like you don't want to just come to your client, be pushing this deal. You want to get your client and show them all the deals and then say, look, I wouldn't do this one. I wouldn't do this one. Like really building trust in a relationship, and that it's better to, make your recommendation. If you recommend a deal and you say, or you recommend not to do the deal, and then the client does it anyway, that's okay. But make sure you're sharing all that information. Taught me a lot about, customer service. He took me on a fishing trip with him and a client. And again, I was like, 22, 23 years old. And we got back from the fishing trip. The next day I walked in my office and there was a framed picture of me with the big fish I caught on my desk. And I was like, man, this guy's good. He really, gets it. And so, yeah, a lot of it, just the blocking and tackling of getting deals done in client relationships.
Good. And how often did you meet with him initially?
I tried to meet with him as often as I could. I think now, I think that part of what was going on with him is he probably was lonely. I think he was going through a divorce or something. And so, and I was a good listener. And so I think in 94, it was multiple times a week. But there again, I worked around his schedule. It wasn't around my schedule. It's not when I wanted to meet. It was when it was convenient to him. And so I'm going to guess 2 to 3 times a week. And that worked.
And then how did that, I assume you're not meeting with him 2 to 3 times currently this week. So how did you kind of wean off that? How did that adapt over time?
Well, I think because it was, I always like to refer to things as a season of life, right? Like he had me work on deals and he took a piece of the deals, and it was a good system because I was learning how to do deals. I was making some money, but I also really felt like, he wasn't looking to make me a partner. He was looking to have me help and be in a junior role. And that was great. There came a time when I really wanted to graduate to a more senior role. And I did that kind of a different area of the company. And so then I helped him replace me. I helped him find another guy to be in that position. And then that other guy has gone on and had a great career on top of that, which is pretty cool. So again, there's kind of seasons. I used to think about things being in a longer term, but sometimes it just is connecting for a period of time that it's mutually beneficial.
So in these early years, when you're showing up first in, last out, you don't feel like you know exactly what you're doing. You're trying to learn. You're trying to absorb the wisdom of the people that are already there. Mm-hmm. How long did it take you before you felt like you really understood what was going on? In that kind of imposter syndrome that I think we all sort of encounter from time to time. How long did it take for that to go away?
I think that started going away about the year was 2028. I can listen, honestly, Willie, I can remember every time my boss would call me into his office, as I was walking in, I was thinking, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to get fired the whole way. And so, I'm
why?
Insecure. It's intimidating. I was 22. The next youngest guy in the office was 31, and most people were in their 40s. And so, you have a sense of like being where we don't belong. And all these people drove Mercedes and BMWs, and I was driving a Dodge Colt, right? So, you just sort of feel like, man, I don't belong here, right? So there's that sense of that. And certainly over time, it got better and better and easier because you just gain confidence. And the other thing is like, there's real power in doing deals, right? Like if you learn how to get deals done, that's a level of power. You learn how to make clients happy, that's a level of power. You learn how to go and find clients on your own, bring them in and close deals. Well, then it's over, right? Like, I remember my last time with a large brokerage company that I was a partner there, but I wasn't, like the guy or anything. I made a ton of money for them, and they really didn't know who any of my clients were. Most of the company really didn't know what I did at that point. And so when you get to that place, then you kind of have a high level of confidence because, you know the value you're bringing, right? But I still to this day really try to have a perspective of what am I bringing, to the office every day, and being very mindful of that, and being very mindful of my time, and being respectful of how I'm using my time.
And so, I've not worked in real estate. My background's kind of insurance and business services, accounting services, things like this. What does it mean to do a real estate deal the way you were doing it?
So early in my career, it would be going out and meeting owners of shopping centers and asking them to hire us to represent them to lease all their vacant spaces. And that's a good business for somebody that's young because leasing space, you can get those deals done kind of fast. And when you're 100% commission and you're young, that helps. It's a business that needs a lot of frontline work. If you're working on a little strip shopping center and you're negotiating with mom and pops, you got to meet them face to face, hold their hand a little bit. So that was part of it. When my career evolved, I then did investment sales. And in a similar way, you're meeting with institutional clients. And so it's a lot of flying up to New York City and meeting with, it could be, oh my gosh, teachers. Back in the day, it was a lot of GE Capital was a big client of mine, but GE did a lot of work with. Clarion, Principal Financial out of Iowa, AEW out of Boston, a lot of these huge financial companies, and explaining to them how by them hiring you to sell their shopping center, you're going to get them the best price. And one of my clients bought a shopping center from Disney and they paid $27 million for it. And I helped them with that acquisition. Then I worked on the property for about 4 or 5 years. And then they wanted to sell it. And they internally valued it at $47 million. That's a pretty great return. Mm-hmm. So then they asked me to sell the property, and I sold it for them for $57 million. Now, remember, if I had sold it for $47.5, they would have been extremely happy. But by finding an extra $10 million, that created some clients for life, right? But that goes back to the core of, I didn't ever look at it of saying, gosh, I'm just going to go sell that property. What I looked at is how can I completely maximize this? So that spirit of coming in early and staying late, that came out in let's look at the center and find every single possible way to market it and position it so it gets the highest return for my client.
And that's kind of interesting because you have sort of an inbound and an outbound element, right? I mean, you have to sell to the investors to trust you to, get the most return out of what they're doing. But then you also have to sell to the individuals leasing the space or purchasing the space later.
Right.
It's kind of an interesting kind of balancing a portfolio of relationships.
That's correct.
And so what are the different, how would your tactics differ between those two sides of the equation?
Well, when you're talking to a tenant, in the retail arena, it's all about store volume, right? It's all about, in this location, can they sell, enough Chinese food for lunch and dinner, or can they, paint enough nails, or can they move enough home goods for Lowe's out of a, site for Lowe's? I mean, it's whatever, how do they move product the most? And so then you start talking about what are the demographics in the area, how are they changing, how's they access the property, and so you're specific to them, right? When you're talking to an investor, it then becomes this what are their goals and how does that perspective get impacted by the market? So if you're talking to somebody and they own a shopping center in Florida, and you're like, hey guys, if you're positioning to sell this in a year, what are all the things that we need to do to make sure that this gets the best price? And so maybe it's Publix has got a short-term lease, and so we need to work through how to get them on a longer-term lease. Is there anything else we need to do to stabilize the property? And then really understanding who are the top buyers of that kind of product, right? So it's funny because I think people think, when I was selling public sector shopping centers, people would say to me oh, well, that's easy. And the answer is, it's easy to sell them. It's not easy to get, record-breaking pricing, right? That's something else. And so trying to look around the corners and make sure you're finding every opportunity to maximize value, that takes a lot more work. And so when you're talking to institutional clients, it's explaining that. If somebody were to bring up an objection and try to devalue the property, how can you inoculate that? How can you reply back and say, no, that's not a reason to deduct the price? And I'll give you an example. A simple one would be, it's when you do your report on the shopping center before you take it to market, you get inspected by a roofer, and the roofer says, hey, that roof's only 2 years old. It's fantastic. There's no need to have it replaced. Or they come up there and say, oh my gosh, the roof's old and it needs $500,000 of work. So when you do the package you send to possible buyers, you put in there, roof needs $500,000 of work. And so then they put on our contract, and then before due diligence ends, say like, oh, hey, we just found out the roof's bad. We need a $500,000 deduction. And then you say back, well, no, you don't, because you knew that when you made the offer because we disclosed it on the front end. So some people would say, well, don't disclose it because then maybe they won't notice, which is a dumb way to think, because when people are buying a $20 million asset, they do their homework. But they do things like that to try to just knock the price down. And you've got to be prepared to push back on that with facts.
Yeah, so a lot of negotiation, try to get all of your ammunition, all of your information together before it even begins.
We're going to stop it right there for now. Please dive into the next episode of the Sales Lab to hear the conclusion of this interview. And by the way, if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe and to rate this podcast on whatever app you use to listen. Also, share this with your colleagues and friends, and let's continue to have a deeper discussion on all things related to selling and sales leadership. See you next time in the Sales Lab.